Hey there, today we're going to be taking a look at 25 different games running on the Beelink SER5 Max. Now this mini PC is rocking a Ryzen 7 5800H with a stock TDP of 54 watts, making it pretty much one of the fastest systems on the market today with the Ryzen 7 5800H. Now the 5800H is interesting because of the fact that even though it is a few generations old, you're pretty much getting identical IPC to the 6800H and the 7735HS. The reason being is that there was really no IPC uplift going from the 5000 series to 6000 series. The only real difference being the iGPU getting a major upgrade. But if CPU performance is what you're after, then this little system is actually going to have pretty much identical CPU performance to systems that are in the $400 to $500 price range. But what we really want to see is just how good the last version of the Vega-based Radeon graphics is able to do. Now, this isn't the full core version of it. It is 8 cores, but that was the maximum that AMD was doing by the end of the life cycle here. And the support for higher memory speeds, as well as a higher clock speed in general for the iGPU, does mean that this performs noticeably better than any of the earlier generation Vega 12 based iGPUs. So to start things off, we're going to be taking a look at Red Dead Redemption 2 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. At these settings, the game actually gives us a decent enough level of performance, where if you're really been looking to actually play this, you might actually be able to get away with playing like this. Now, it's certainly not the most ideal, but if you're someone that is used to playing on iGPUs, then this is actually impressive levels of performance considering the age of the APU itself and just how demanding the title usually is. Of course, FSR is doing a lot of heavy lifting here since this is FSR at the performance preset, but visually speaking, it looks fine enough that you can actually get away with playing the game like this. So an overall pretty impressive result. Now, another title that I very frequently like to test is Batman Arkham Knight. Here you can see it running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we are at the full 1080p resolution. Now, while we're not hitting a 60 FPS average, the averages that we are reaching are decent enough, and our 1% lows are letting us know that we're going to have a very nice and consistent experience overall. Certainly not the most ideal situation, but realistically for a title like this, you can very easily get away with playing at these graphics settings with this level of performance. And again, I am impressed with the result that we got out of this. But the real showstoppers here are always the esports titles, as you can see here with Rainbow Six Siege running with the built-in benchmark. We are running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR with the performance preset. The overall result here is a fantastic showing where you're actually going to be able to utilize a high refresh rate display and see some benefit from it. And in general, it was a very enjoyable experience, not just running the built-in benchmark, but actually sitting down and playing the game was very fun like this. Of course, for older titles in general, this system really shows some great levels of performance, as you can see here with Grid 2 running with the built-in benchmark. This is at the high graphics preset. And you can see here that again we are seeing what is effectively high refresh rate gaming. If you had a 144 Hz display, then you'd be able to utilize a good bit of it and see some pretty nice benefits from it. And of course, since most displays nowadays do support FreeSync, having the fluctuations in the FPS isn't really going to ruin your experience all that much. And really, as long as you're willing to make some compromises in terms of graphics settings, in most games you're really going to be able to hit an at least above 30 FPS average, a lot of the times getting very close to 60 FPS. As you can see here with Mafia 2, the definitive edition, while visually speaking it doesn't look incredible, the FPS that we're getting does show that this would actually be a very nice playable experience. And what this really shows is that there is going to be a wide library of games from multiple years that you're going to be able to play on this system at really great frame rates, where you don't necessarily need to be on the latest and greatest. There are still a lot of these older titles that are really enjoyable today. For example, a game that I love always coming back to is Fallout 4. While it isn't my favorite in the franchise, in fact, it's pretty much my least favorite of the Fallout games, not counting Fallout 76, of course. The overall level of performance that we get on a system like this is really nice, and there is still so much customization and so much modability in the game itself that you'll actually be able to do a lot of that on here. Your biggest limitation, of course, potentially being the amount of RAM, so if you can upgrade to 32 gigabytes of RAM, I would recommend doing that. And of course, keep in mind that you're going to be pretty limited in terms of visual mods that you can install. Although things like higher quality textures, you will be surprised by actually how beneficial those can end up being. One of the benefits of using an APU is essentially the fact that you can actually dynamically adjust the amount of VRAM that you have, and the system itself will automatically do that. You don't need to adjust anything in the BIOS. So if you had 32 gigabytes of RAM or 64 gigabytes of RAM, and you had, let's say, 8K textures installed, you'd be able to utilize them perfectly fine because you'd have more than enough RAM for it. So definitely something to keep in mind. Of course, in Spider-Man Remastered, the level of performance was actually really surprising to me. We were getting an above 30 FPS average for both our average and our 1% lows. And that meant that the overall experience here, and we are using FSR with the performance preset, was actually something that was pretty playable. And this is one of those titles where if this is the only system that you have and you really want to play it, you can actually do it on here. And that actually really impressed me. I was genuinely not expecting to get this good of a result out of something running off of Vega. But here we are actually seeing some really great numbers overall. And in terms of playability, it did a pretty solid job. It in a lot of ways felt more consistent than when I tried turning on ray tracing on my RTX 3070 Ti at 1440p. Of course, overall, high refresh rate gaming is going to be possible in a lot of titles, just depending on what exactly it is that you're going to be doing. As you can see here with BattleBit Remastered running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, the level of performance that we're getting is absolutely incredible. And if we had a high refresh rate display hooked up to this, we would be having a beautiful time. Of course, the display that I do hook this up to can go all the way up to 240, though through my capture card, it is capped out to 144 hertz. Now, unfortunately, throughout all of this testing, I was playing through the OBS preview window, so I was getting none of those benefits. But while actually playing the games on the system for testing, since I do multiple runs before I actually record anything, that was actually a very enjoyable experience, going all the way up to 144 hertz. Of course, we would not be able to take full capability of that 240 hertz of the display itself, but since we have FreeSync support, then it doesn't really matter. We're still able to actually utilize that FPS pretty decently. And that really just does seem to be the case, because depending on the esports title that you're playing, you are looking at having an above 100 FPS a lot of the time, as you can see here with Valorant. Really great levels of performance, and overall, your biggest limitation is going to be your skill more than anything, as you can see by me getting absolutely destroyed. Please, in my defense, I was using the OBS preview window, but also I am very terrible at this game. Of course, while esports titles are some of the most popular in the world, they're not really the things that I play the most frequently. I tend to play more co-op and single-player titles, and one of the ones that I always love going back to is Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. One of the reasons that it is so frequently tested by me is specifically because it is exactly the type of title that I enjoy, and I feel like a lot of the fans of this series and these types of games kind of just get forgotten in the sea of benchmarks of really popular titles. And as you can see here, with the lowest in-game graphics settings, you are actually able to get some pretty nice levels of performance out of this. Where realistically, if I was growing up with a system like this, if for $300 I could get a system that performed this well in a lot of the popular titles that I wanted to play, I would be so happy. Now, of course, we do have to temper those expectations, as you can see here with Cyberpunk running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. We aren't exactly going to be getting a ultra playable gaming experience. Now, the 1% lows themselves look pretty abysmal, but it is very similar to Red Dead Redemption 2 in the sense that the 1% lows do dip down to a level where I think a lot of people might not be happy with. But it really just comes down to how badly do you want to play this title, really. Our FPS average is at least above 30, but keep in mind that you are going to be seeing frequent stutters as you play the game itself. An interesting development over the years has also been the fact that a lot of these games as a service titles have been around long enough now that they have been seeing some updates that have slowly been pushing their hardware requirements up. One of those titles, of course, is Counter-Strike, formerly known as Global Offensive, now known as Counter-Strike 2. This new major update to Counter-Strike pretty much brought with it some graphical improvements, but of course, with that, there is always a trade-off in terms of performance. Now, on a low-end piece of hardware like this, we are still seeing some very nice FPS averages and 1% lows that are at a really decent range. It isn't perfect, but in general, you kind of don't have much to complain about. It is a brand new update to a really popular title, and you're going to be able to get decent levels of performance. You're just not looking at that ultra high refresh rate experience that you would probably get out of Valorant. Now taking a look at the built-in benchmark of Borderlands 3, a game from a series that I'm not particularly a fan of, though it really mostly just comes down to the type of genre that it is. But the latest mainline entry in the series ends up giving us at least decent levels of performance, nothing amazing, but it is at least consistently above 30 FPS, though we aren't really hitting that 60 FPS. And it really just seems to continue this trend that we're going to be seeing a lot, where above 30 is very doable in a lot of these titles, but hitting 60 just quite isn't there yet. Of course, another title that I wanted to take a look at was Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered. This is a remastered version of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, my absolutely favorite Call of Duty game that I've ever played. Really, Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2 were just such an era, and considering that I've played through this campaign originally probably dozens of times, it is very nice to be able to come in and actually play it remastered and get such high FPS on a system without a graphics card. I played the original version of this game on a PC that could barely even run it, and now the remaster is just able to be run on a little system without even a graphics card. I absolutely love it. Keep in mind that you're not going to get a perfect experience in every title just because it's old. Here you can see with Metro Last Light, one of my favorite games out there from one of my favorite game series, we're able to get some decent enough FPS averages, though slightly disappointing 1% lows. But we do have to run everything at the lowest in-game graphics settings. Now, visually, that still looks really, really good. The difference between the low graphics settings and the highest is very minuscule, but it is kind of disappointing that this is as good as it gets for a title that is this old. But it's still more than playable enough, and if you've never played through this series, I would highly recommend it. I absolutely love it. Now, for a game series that a lot of the time seems to be more benchmark than actual game, we have Rise of the Tomb Raider here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings at the full 1080p resolution. And the performance is decent enough. If you've been looking to play this title, if you picked it up for free from Epic, well, you're actually going to be able to play it perfectly fine on this system, and that really is impressive enough. Though the 1% lows aren't ideal, it's still going to be a decent enough experience. Now, not all esports titles are going to perform the same. Here you can see with Apex Legends running, we're looking at more of a 60 FPS average, though the 1% lows are close enough that there's not really going to be much of a problem here. Now, it might look like VSync is on, but at least based off of all of the settings that I've messed with and everything, VSync should be off. And if I look at the sky, I can get the FPS to go all the way up to 80, but it does seem like the game itself is just consistently staying at an about 60 FPS average. So not exactly perfect for a game like this. You definitely want something higher if you can get it, but it is pretty playable, especially considering the fact that the 1% lows are so tightly close to that FPS average. In general, I think that it's going to be your skill holding you back at this point more than the system itself.
Now, for a brand new title here, we have Assassin's Creed Mirage running with a built-in benchmark, and this was one of the ones that impressed me the most. Now, it's not the most remarkable 1% lows, and the FPS average certainly isn't spectacular, but it is a brand new title in 2023. Of course, FSR continues to do some heavy lifting in modern titles since we are using FSR at the performance preset, but the point is that we're getting a kind of playable experience here. Again, not perfect 1% lows, not a great average, but if you're okay with essentially a 30 FPS gaming experience, this is pretty much there. And that's not too bad for a $300 system that is this small and doesn't even have a graphics card. Now, one title that disappointed me a bit in terms of performance was Monster Hunter World, one of those games that ended up consuming my life for a solid 2 weeks when I first got into it. Now, it has been a good while since I've played, so I really did not know what I was doing here at all. But in general, we are using the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using the CAS upscaling that is built into the game. Now, if you don't know what this is pretty much almost like a early version of what would have eventually become FSR, specifically FSR 1.0, where it was essentially just a really basic way of doing a upscale, where it would reduce the resolution a little bit and then just sharpen things with a sharpening filter to try to essentially make up for the loss in visual quality. It's certainly not amazing, it doesn't look great, but considering how old this title is, its inclusion is at least nice, but I was very disappointed to see that it didn't really boost our performance to an at least 60 FPS average, though our 1% lows are very close to our average, so it's at least a very consistent experience. Still, considering the age of the title, I was just hoping to see a little bit better than this.
Now, taking a look at Civilization 6, another game that is far more likely to be like the types of games that I like to play, we did the built-in turn test. Now, this is testing more of the CPU than the GPU, but considering this is an APU, well, they go hand in hand. And the overall turn time that we actually ended up getting here was 9.73 seconds per turn. Not exactly the most ideal, but for a mini PC, this is one of the better results that you can actually get. And really, you're not looking to get meaningful gains out of most other systems anywhere near this price range. Now, another title that actually ended up giving a pretty decent result, though nothing spectacular, is of course GTA 5. Still one of the most popular games in the world right now, even over a decade after it launched. And of course, thanks to programs like 5M, it has really found an entirely new life. And thankfully, a system like this is at least going to be capable of playing it at a reasonable enough experience. Though again, considering the age of the title itself, it's not exactly remarkable performance. And of course, if you're going to be doing anything related to GTA Online or 5M, keep in mind that you are going to be seeing a bit of a performance hit, but you are still going to be able to actually play the game. So again, a pretty decent result for what is essentially still one of those titles that a lot of people seem to really care about. And really, considering that GTA 6 is still not right around the corner, I get the feeling that GTA 5 is going to continue to hold some pretty major popularity. Now, I did mention that I do prefer doing co-op type games, and World War Z Aftermath is pretty much exactly the type of title that I would normally be playing. So it's great to see that we're actually able to get a really nice result here. Of course, FSR doing some heavy lifting here. We are using FSR at the performance preset, but visually speaking, it is still more than playable like this. And really, the overall result is a smooth, great experience. And it means that for a lot of the titles that I would normally just want to play on a day-to-day basis, we actually get some pretty great results here. That said, though, there are a lot of titles out there that on PC, for whatever reason, have a hard-locked limit to 60 FPS. A perfect example is here you're looking at Wolfenstein: The New Order, a title from 2014, which would be pretty much around the perfect level of performance for a system like this. But ironically, what ends up happening here is that the hardware itself is being held back by the game because it has a hard 60 FPS limit that really requires you to edit some game files
for things to improve in terms of FPS, and that will actually end up affecting certain events in the game. So you actually will have to switch and lock the FPS back. And once unlocking the FPS in a game pretty much leads to any kind of hard locks, I just don't consider it a viable option. So realistically, if you're going to be playing this game, you're going to have that 60 FPS lock. And well, in that scenario, you're actually just better off turning up graphics settings because you're kind of just not really fully utilizing the GPU. As you can see there right now, the GPU is not at 100% load. So of course I could either enjoy the lower power usage, therefore lower noise being made, or I could turn up graphics settings and get that GPU utilization a lot closer to 100% while still keeping that 60 FPS lock. You do get some flexibility like that, and these titles that have hard locks at 60 FPS can sometimes actually be a blessing. Though in a lot of titles, you might not even really be able to reach that full 60 FPS potential. Now, one engine that seems to consistently have problems in these APUs is the Unreal 4 engine. And here you can see Mordhau running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. And we're not exactly getting a 60 FPS average, and those 1% lows don't look very impressive either. It's certainly playable, but if you're looking to be a competitive player on here, which is just a laughable thing, but you know, some people like to take the weirdest game seriously, so no judgment there. But if you care at all about being competitive here, you're going to find it to be lacking. But if you're just looking to mess around with your friends, do some bot matches, or anything like that, you're at least going to have the capability. Just again, temper those expectations and pay attention to those frame time charts, because that should let you know that this isn't exactly going to be the most responsive, smooth experience. If that doesn't bother you though, and you manage to pick up this title for free from the Epic Game Store, then you do actually have a pretty decent chance of being able to play the game on here. And the last game that I wanted to take a look at on here was Dead Island 2. Now this is running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using this with FSR set to the performance preset, and unfortunately it is not a great experience. Now the FPS average is alright, and considering the 1% lows that we're getting, it doesn't exactly look remarkable, but pay attention to those frame time charts and you will see what I mean in terms of it doesn't feel great. Those consistent spikes that you see there are very noticeable when you're actually trying to play the game. It overall just feels like the game itself is fighting you while you're trying to play this. So an absolutely devastating experience for the most part, and really I would just recommend not playing this title on here. But I also did play the original Dead Island about a decade ago on a system that performed much worse than this. So considering I did manage to actually play the first game at what was around more of a 20 FPS average, if you're really into this series and you're really looking to play this, you can do it. I just will also mention that there's a lot more games out there that you can just play. The market is way different than when I was a kid. We didn't exactly have a huge abundance of free-to-play games that ran beautifully on any system. If I could have just downloaded CSGO or Valorant back then and actually play it for free, you would not have seen me playing Dead Island 1 at 15 to 20 FPS, but that's just me. So overall, what did we learn from all of these tests? Well, for one, on all 25 games, we were able to get a minimum FPS average of at least 30 FPS or above, with many of these titles going well above 60 FPS. Though for the vast majority, we were somewhere around 30 to 45 FPS. One thing to keep in mind though, is that while every game was able to get above 30 FPS average, in terms of 1% low, only 22 of the 25 titles were actually able to be above. So what that means is that for some of these titles, it will be kind of a struggle to actually try to play them depending on your tolerance. Games like Cyberpunk and Red Dead Redemption 2 were really not hitting that at least 30 for the 1% lows that I try to target for an overall good experience. But still, this little system is impressive considering that a lot of these titles it did really well in. And overall, considering the price point that it's at right now, this is pretty much the best
mini PC on the market in terms of price to performance, because you're looking at spending almost an extra $200 if you actually want to get meaningful performance uplifts in terms of the GPU. And even then, you don't get a CPU uplift at all. You won't see that until you get to a mini PC with a 7840HS, and we're talking about systems that are now in the $700+ price range. So I'm really impressed by this system. If you're interested in picking one up, check out the links down below. We'll catch you guys in the next one.